Hello, writers. It's great to see you here. Congratulations on taking advantage of this valuable opportunity to learn more about your employment contract. I'm Albert Munoz. I'm a guild representative and organizer, and your moderator for this evening. We have a bit ambitious agenda with a lot of information to cover, and we want to make sure to have time to hear from you. So we're going to dive right in. After our informational discussion, we will open it up to your questions. Please be prepared to turn on your camera and your mic when you're called upon. To get on the list to ask your question, please simply raise your hand using the raise hand button or follow the instructions that we'll drop in the chat. Scott's going to be helping us out with that. Now let's get started with our discussion, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to our panelists this evening: Allison Schroeder, WGAW mentor and screenwriter; Josh Weiser, Senior Contracts Counsel; and Brad Schleder, Contracts Counsel. So let's start. First things first. Why should screenwriters take a close look at their contract, and why shouldn't they just leave it up to a lawyer or their representative?
Well, I can start, everyone, if that's all right. Yeah, I think it's really important to note, what actually you have in the contract, because you want to know, what are you getting paid to do? I mean, what steps are you actually getting paid for, and what steps are they asking you to do that, maybe a little above and beyond what's actually in your contract. As we all know, companies will try to, include additional things in there if they can. So it's really important to know that. It's also really important to be able to tell your rep what you want in a deal. Especially if you have original material, if there's certain rights you want to hold on, if there's certain, if you want to do something for a television show or a book or something based off your work. So yeah, those are some of them. The other thing that I would say is really important to know is, I know we're talking in a theatrical context here, and we'll get into this later, but you really want to know what the medium is intended for. Where is this going to end up? Where is this going to go? And that all will color what you do.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of things that I've learned the hard way to look for in a contract. Oh, my lawyer also had a total coronary when I said I was doing this. So just to preface this, I'm not a lawyer. You all know that. I'm a writer, and I'm not an agent or manager. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. But from my personal experience, one of the first things I look for is, how are they classifying it? Are they classifying it as an adapted, or are they classifying it as an original? Because that really makes a difference down the line when it comes to arbitrating for credit and just all that stuff, that how it's sort of talked about and how it's sort of considered for credit in the end. And you also will suddenly find out that, oh, I thought I was writer A on this project, or writer B, and suddenly there's like a list of names of all these other people that have written, and you're like, wait, what? And you have a right to get those screenplays or get that source material and look at it, and you also want to go in with your eyes wide open that you're not the first person developing it, what have you. Or if they're claiming it's based on source material, half the time I'm like, I've never seen that before in my life, and they need to give it to you. So that's one thing. The other thing is, like, it'll say how many weeks you have to write a script. And I'll just be like, oh, 6 weeks? Yeah, this is a page 1 revision. You need to tell them that. And those are stuff that, like, your lawyers and your reps may not totally be in the loop on how much work it is. And so you need to give them the ammunition to push back. So you need to see what you're contracted for. You need to see how much time you have. And then we can get into it, but there's a lot of other little things that I make sure my contract has. I'm gonna go close my blinds, but
yeah, it looks great. So, sorry, Brad, yeah?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, a lot of what Allison said makes a lot of sense there in terms of, if it's original, is there underlying material, or if it's not, is there underlying material written in your contract? Did you get that material? Are they going to provide that? And certainly in terms what she's saying about the, the writing periods, is this something that you're going to be able to feasibly do in that time, because you of course want to make sure that you get it delivered on time, or you get something in writing from them saying that, you know, they're giving you an extension on that. So all those things I thought were great points.
Yeah, I agree. And so when's a deal, and when should writers commence? When should you start writing?
So the short answer is once you've closed, once the conditions precedent have been reached, or you've received notes, or you've received some sort of instruction from the company about commencing. I think Allison has some good advice in this regard.
Yeah, my lawyer always tells me when the short form is done, right? You guys were talking about short form versus like the long form contract. So you can start before the long form is done. I feel like one time I finished the entire job and the long form hadn't finished yet. So when the lawyer says it, and then a lot of times what happens for me is there's this loosey-goosey Zoom where they're like, yeah, like this sounds great, let's do it. And you're like, what does that mean? And so I always send a follow-up email, and you're like, this was such a great discussion today. I'm so excited. I'm going to start writing immediately. Look forward to hearing your thoughts, and get it in writing. And you have to look at your contract, because your contract will say who has the power to commence you. So like sometimes you might be working for a production company, but technically if you're just emailing that production company, it doesn't count. You have to be emailing the exec at the studio. And that's the same thing for turning it in and chain of command when it comes to arbitrations. Like, yeah, sometimes sometimes producers count, but in terms of like who commences you, it's who's in the contract, and that's who you need to put on the email. And then I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes you might have too many things going on and maybe you can't start right away. I also can sometimes be like, soon as you pay me that commencement money, I'm gonna start right away, just as soon as you pay me. And that's completely legitimate to do as well.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's exceptionally important point that Allison made too, about noting who companies are required to include the person who can authorize steps in the contract. So it's really important that you have that person there, because you know, producers are not agents of the studios. And if you get, you know, a word from a certain producer, especially when you're talking about commencing on a rewrite or something like that, the company might later try to argue, we never actually authorized that. So I think that was some really good advice, and really important for people to note.
So if I can just get metaphysical really, really quick, a contract does not need to be written down in order to be legally binding. It takes offer, acceptance, and something of value exchanged between the parties. Lawyers call that consideration. And so, you know, you could have, you know, your agent or you even talk to the company and you come to terms on an agreement, and that is an enforceable contract that the guild could enforce on your behalf, or the short form, or a deal points email. You know, if hopefully you're not colorblind when you read one of those deal points emails, because that helps to be able to see the different colors, even though it looks like it's English.
Yeah, and one other important point about that too is once you start, invoice, because that is other good evidence for you later in case there's an issue. So that's certainly something I would, you know, tell your reps or you yourselves if you don't have them to invoice.
You have to email your refs. I adore my refs. I think they're great. I have to tell them to do a lot of stuff, and that's okay. So I'm like, I am writing, please invoice. Or I think they picked up an optional step. Can you call and double check? Like that's all it took here.
Smart. And if you get 50% upon commencement and 50% upon delivery, then under the MBA, they've got to pay you within 7 days of commencing you. Otherwise, interest begins to accrue on that amount.
All right, thank you guys. We're off to a great start. This one's going to seem simple, but I feel it's important to define this term before we go any further. What does overscale refer to?
It's anything that's above and beyond what the minimums that are required in the MBA. You know, the guild contract permits any writer to negotiate a term that is better than anything that's in the MBA, but nobody can actually negotiate something that is worse than the MBA. Only the guild has the authority to waive a minimum.
You want to sound fancy at parties, throw around the term overscale. I'm getting paid overscale to do this. Here's scale, and you're making over it. That's overscale.
So if a member was looking for guidance from the contracts department or the guild about steps they could take, where should they go? Where should members be looking for information?
I call them. I call all the time. Not all the time, but I'm like, here's my scenario. And they're like, hey, one time I tried to call in anonymously to ask for advice, and they were like, hey, Allison. And I was like, no. Okay. But like, that's what they're there for. I mean, because the thing is, every situation, honestly, is so nuanced. And like, I'll call all the time and be like, okay, is this allowed? Is this allowed? What are they calling this? And that's what you need. And you can email as well. You can start with an email. I personally find it better to do it on the phone so that you can explain the exact situation in all the nuance, and they can sort of give you a more blunt answer.
Usually a conversation is best. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of reading the MBA. I can recommend certain provisions if you ever have insomnia and you want like a surefire cure to bring about sleep. But the rules are sometimes pretty tedious and they're super fact dependent. And so like if you're working on a long form project, we might give you one answer if you indicate that it's a theatrical, but a totally different answer if it becomes a high budget streaming MOW, for example. And you might just think it's like one thing.
Yeah, and you can also take advantage. We have some information on our website as well that goes through, you know, in broad strokes, some of the outlines of things that are a little bit easier to digest in the MBA. So of course you can contact us, but, you know, encourage people to also take a look at some of that stuff if they're interested.
And so why is it important for writers to submit their contracts to the guild? I know we're always looking for information.
Yes, and this is really, you know, there's several reasons to it. And I would say that the first and foremost is that when you submit contracts to the guild actually, our department reviews all contracts for MBA minimums first. So if we think there's an issue with the contract, it's going to get flagged. And you may not necessarily think about it, or you may not, you know about it. And, you know, we do our best. We get a lot of contracts, but somebody will go through and review and say, hey, is there a problem here? You know, that's the first part of it. You know, another one is that, you know, we are utilizing contracts to get data to help everybody and help writers across the board. We launched the Writer Deal Hub initiative, which basically our research department went through tens of thousands of contracts and the metadata that's being entered to be able to make determinations of what people are getting paid and how it's affecting writer pay across the industry. So the overall goal is to, you know, is to really improve that. And the other thing too is when we review contracts, the more we see, the better we get. I mean, when we see contracts, we spot trends and issues and problems that a particular studio may be trying to insert this language. And, you know, one of our attorneys will pick up and say, I think that's a problem. I think there's a minimum issue here. And if we don't get them, we don't know about it, or unless somebody calls.
Yeah, I'll tell the selfish reasons. Therefore, they're called pension, they're called health, they're called credit, and they're called residuals. The amount of times that I have looked at my pension and health, like, and the company has not put the amount in, is sort of staggering. And you call the guild and the first thing they say is, give us your contract. And so I would much rather have the contract there ready so they can go after it for me from the get-go. Credit, I don't know if anyone's ever had the beautiful joy of an arbitration, but your contract is super vital in terms of all of that and sort of how it was classified, what was classified, and then residuals. You know, how did they sell the project? How is it getting shown? I had a new media project that ended up airing on a cable station instead of as a series, as a TV movie. And the first thing the Guild was like, they looked at my contract and they were like, yep, we can totally get you money for this. So money is a really good reason to submit your contract to the Guild.
And the only other thing that I would add is we're going to be here in 50 years. So earlier today, I was just asked if we had a copy of a contract from the mid 60s, and we were looking for it. Don't be like that writer who didn't submit it because we didn't have it. You want to be like that writer who did submit it, so we can say, yeah, here you go, and give it to your state, and help enforce your rights, or hopefully you'll be living 50 years from now. Didn't mean to imply everyone would have an estate 50 years from now.
And we're planning on it. So late pay, what resources does the Guild have to enforce late pay claims? And what are the rules around timely payment?
Me or you or
Go ahead, Josh.
So we're super aggressive. I might not look like much, but get me on a late pay claim and I'll, over the top arm wrestle that company and pin them to the table. So, I mean, we're really super aggressive about it. It's really important. It's at the heart of the agency campaign. Some of the data that we get from the agents, the whole idea behind it is so we can go after enforcement of late pay issues. You're supposed to get paid. The NBA says you're supposed to get paid within 48 hours, but no later than 7 days. So I mentioned 7 days earlier, but technically it's within 48 hours. And so whenever you've earned it, your contract, the NBA says you have to get paid upon delivery, but sometimes you have an overscale, scales here, and you're over that scale, that says you get 50% upon commencement and 50% on delivery. And so once they've commenced you, they've got to pay you, and it's late. And interest is pretty good under the NBA. It's 1.5% a month. That's 18% a year. Doesn't compound. It's simple interest, but simple interest can be a good incentive to make sure you get paid.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question, even though I'm a panelist. How often do they get ticked off at you, though, to the writer, if we go after late pay? You all.
We could. That's a good question. I mean, we will coordinate with the writers' reps. And if you're in the middle of something delicate, like you're negotiating a new project, then we can wait, to raise the issue. But, they can't retaliate against you. It's, violation of federal labor law. They can't retaliate against you for enforcing your rights under a collective bargaining agreement, which is the NBA. And we can do it in such a way where, we can indicate that we're just doing it, even despite your knowledge, or it came up on audit. And frankly, we are trying to audit it in such a way that it becomes a legitimate thing that we're telling the writer after, that we found this issue and that we saw that you weren't paid and that we're enforcing your rights.
And another thing about that too is, if they're paying you late, they're probably paying other people late. And to the extent that we can have solidarity with people, that always helps.
Okay, I have a question. So one time in Bandcamp, I sold a spec, but they didn't pay me because the other deals hadn't closed, like with the other talent, right? And so 15 months went by, and I lost my health insurance, and I had to get a second job and all that good stuff. And ultimately, you guys were able to go after them for they eventually commenced me on the guaranteed rewrite, but you guys were able to go after them for late pay because they had shopped the script around, even though what is the legalese of that? What happened to me?
Yeah. I mean, Brad, you were just talking about that earlier. You want to talk about exercising exclusive control?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is if you're talking about a script under option, I think is that what you had with
the spec sale and a rewrite, guaranteed.
Okay, but did they actually sell the, did you sell the property already at the time? Because if that's the case, it was already, yeah, and you already sold it and the rewrite was guaranteed. I mean, it would have to, again, they're all fact dependent, but I would have to say, that's certainly something we could probably go after that. And if the company was, taking steps in order to continue to make the film at that point, they should have at that point already, commenced you on your rewrite. I can't speak to the
Oh,
situation.
no, I think the point is, if a place is stalling you and paying you and they give you this like reason, they're like, well, other people's deals haven't closed, or we're waiting for the financier. Like, if your deal is done, like, they need to pay you. So call the guild, because I don't know, I was naive. I didn't understand how things worked. And, eventually the guild stepped in and helped me.
You also have your reps use the guild as leverage. More often than not, a rep, on a writer's behalf can just credibly threaten that the guild is going to enforce, because we're ready to enforce. Just happened last week. On Thursday, I was told someone wasn't paid for something. The reps, I said, all right, I'll draft the demand email and ask for the interest. And the company the very next day agreed to pay it. Big major studio.
There you go.
I'm going to remind everyone we're going to have a question and answer period and use the hand raise function when that time comes. But for now, from the panelists, what are some red flags that would cause you to maybe think twice before taking on a project?
I mean, I can think of some just from looking at the contracts, but I'm sure Allison probably has some good anecdotes here. But I will say, for us, honestly, if the company is trying to offer you less than minimum, or a lot of times if you're starting to get this runaround from a company on the made for market, if they're trying to tell you, we don't know what this is and we're going to pick that, and a lot of times they'll try to say this is quote unquote an original new media project, and because it's under this certain budget threshold, everything's negotiable, so why don't we pay you $100 for your script? I mean, that to me sounds pretty much like a red flag that you're looking at, well, really, that you don't really want this, or you're what are you're gonna buy my spec for $100? I mean, that seems a little ridiculous. So I will say that you get a lot of that stuff, and just
Conscionable.
Yeah, you get a lot. I mean, we've seen companies try to say we can pay you $1 to write a whole script for new media, and that's not even minimum wage. So
if it seems weird and the company is saying, oh, it's okay with the guild rules, we checked it, it's okay with the guild rules, you should always independently verify.
Yeah.
Always.
I mean, one of the things that I'm hearing is like people go into a pitch expecting that, or under the impression that they're going to hire for a draft of the script, and then they get thrown and it's just a treatment that you have to do with the director, right? Or it's, they're calling it a polish and not a rewrite, and you're starting from scratch, or they can only pay this much. And I've learned this the really hard way. I mean, it's hard enough pitching for free and doing all that work for free. So I definitely have my reps, or you can do it yourself, just call ahead and say, hey, I just want to make sure, like, what is this for? Are you hiring for a draft? Are you hiring for a pit, for a treatment? And can you meet my client's quotes? And sometimes they will lie and say yes, and it's not true. But it's better to ask ahead of time than spend weeks on a project and then they're like, oh no, but we're going to do it under a low budget, new medium, hyper, I don't know, whatever thing contract. That's totally.
That is the technical term for it.
That's what I thought. I thought so. And you get screwed. So and the other thing is, like, I feel like there's some misunderstanding, and the lawyers will correct me, but they can't ask your quote, but you can't authorize your reps to give your quote. So yeah. I get a lot, I mean, hypothetically, I get pushed back and they're like, no, that's not real. And I'm like, yeah, it is here. And sometimes you have to do that. And that's totally within your right. And it's something you can do before you even go up for the job. So you don't have this horrible moment where you've gotten the offer on the table. They say it's their final offer and you're like, do we do this? I put in so much time and energy. Do I take this amount of money? So that's one of my tips.
Yeah, so they can't ask for your quote, but if it is advantageous for you to volunteer it, you should absolutely do that for leverage. And then a rewrite, just since it came up, that's any significant changes in plot, storyline, or the interrelationship of characters. So if it's a significant change to plot, storyline, or the interrelationship of characters, that's not a polish, it's a rewrite. Polish is just dialogue for the most part.
So once you're on the job, what is a writer entitled to if a project's budget changes from low to high?
You call the guild. Yeah, I mean, I've worked on a few of those, and I mean, you guys will talk, but like, I think that's one of the biggest sort of tricks I hear going on is that they're like, it's totally a small budget movie. And like the moment that like Tom Cruise signs on, you should,
Yeah.
So
Within
like,
30 days of Tom Cruise signing on, they've got to pay you the difference between the low budget minimums and the high budget minimums. And the big issue is, what about your overscale that you're normally entitled to? So by operation of the NBA, you get the higher minimums, but if you typically get overscale, you'll want some sort of bonus that's structured that can provide you with the benefit of the budget becoming a super high budget production or even a mid budget production. And a typical structure that I've seen, which isn't true in every instance, but you get, you would ask for 5% of the ongoing budget, less whatever you were paid out in compensation to write the various steps of the screenplay.
Yeah, and I will also say too that it could end up being a quite significant if it goes from low to high in the new media context, if they're actually considering it a long form new media project versus an original, quote, an original new media project, or as we call them, paragraph 3, paragraph 4. But effectively, the rules there are incredibly different, and there could be a lot of advantages, and obviously they have to pay you that difference, as Josh said, but on top of that, it completely changes basically the structure of how everything's going to work, from residuals to separated rights to everything else.
And it's not directly within the scope of the question, but it's related. And if you were engaged on a theatrical and then later the studio comes to you and they slide across the desk a one-page agreement saying this has always been a high budget long form MOW, you want to be careful, because long form MOW, they can credit your overscale for the script. Anything that's over more than 200% over the network prime or the network primetime script fee, they can credit towards your residuals, which you don't want to have happen. So you want language that says that they can't credit any of the overscale amounts that you're paid for the screenplay against future residuals. And then you'll also want to try to lock in a theatrical residual equivalent if you can. So we improved high budget streaming residuals the last go around significantly. But in many cases, a theatrical residual of 1.2% of the license fee is going to be higher. And so you'll want to negotiate something that provides you with the theatrical residuals that you would have received if those are in fact greater than the NBA minimum residuals that you would get.
And similarly to that, if you're talking about things in the contract and you're dealing with something that might be switched to medium, if you're typically getting like a box office bonus, you should be looking, in case it gets released on streaming, what kind of bonus you're going to get. There should be some kind of equivalent thing that you can negotiate in your deal, because a lot of, as you see now, they switch the platform and say, oh, well, there's no box office anymore, so we're sorry.
Yeah, residuals is a really big thing. I mean, I'm definitely writing some movies that have ended up selling to streaming, so I'm sure my residuals will be not what they once were. I think my lawyer's going to. I think they normally put it in my credit bonus. They sort of those seem to be going up now for movies that are on streaming. That's one of the places that you can possibly negotiate because it's not. I mean, my lawyer would say, "Get all the money you can up front." Okay, so get all the money you can up front, right?
Good advice.
Be like, the guy. I mean, you can. Look, you should have, hopefully, you have a great lawyer and great reps, but let's say hypothetically, maybe you don't. Remind them to say, yeah, but you guys are this is streaming. So you got to pay them more upfront because look how much they're going to, lose in residuals, right? And you can also then negotiate with your credit bonus so that it's bigger. And that also, like, they only have to pay that if it gets made. And so, that might be where you get some movement, if you will. And then I've also had the thing where, like, it was sort of an indie. And so sometimes you can be like a producer on it and get profit sharing. So these are all things that you should negotiate and tools in your tool belt when you're doing it. One of my gross little tricks. Sorry. They're the other things that I've learned to ask for.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're allowed to bring, they have to invite you to the premiere, right? Is that correct, gentlemen?
Yes.
Yes.
They don't have to give you a guest. And so have in your contract a +1. Seriously, it's how my husband's gotten to go to almost everything. And like one time it was a kids movie. And so I asked for an extra ticket and I was like, but my baby 2-year-old, like, she has to see it. You actually want to put that in the contract because when it comes time for that stuff, they're super big sticklers when it comes to the writers. The MBA covers some of your travel, but like it doesn't explicitly state per diem. Get one of those if you can. I think those are my 2 things that I'm always like, make sure we do this. And then I also make sure that the credit bonus is for written by or screenplay by, so that, because if it's just written by and you don't get written by, but you get screenplay by, I don't want to lose my credit. My lawyer says that's standard now, but I'm just throwing it out there in case it's not.
Yeah, one of the other things is you should also now include teleplay in case it ends up on streaming.
There you go.
Same reason. Yeah, and then I'll say just there's a couple other things in terms of extra stuff to put in there. I mean, always look at sequels and spinoffs with everything with these big tentpole franchises now. What's going to happen? What are you going to get? Especially if you don't have separated rights in the project, if it's not original. If you create an original character in a sequel to some massive film franchise and they reuse that character over and over again, unless you have an overscale provision in your contract, you're not getting anything for their continued reuse of that character. So you really do need to include language like that for sequels, for spinoffs, if there's a spinoff TV show, those kind of things. And also you should include the right of first refusal in those, in those instances as well, subject to your professional availability for you to write on it if that's what you decide to do, because it's something that you created. So I think those are just a couple other tips. I think there's a few others too, but I wanted to mention that. And then, one of the other big things too, I think would be reversion of a screenplay or have ability to reacquire in the event that it doesn't get made. And we can get into a little bit of that later if we get into separated rights, but you can get an overscale reversion provision, something like if they don't make it within a couple of years, then it reverts back to you. That's kind of the gold standard for what you're looking for.
Yeah, I screwed that up on a contract.
All right. So I want everyone to know there's provisions related to creative rights, and we have a representative on staff that can work with you on those. Her name's Kathy Genovese, and she's here tonight. She's going to drop her information in the chat. And give you a brief summary of what those creative rights are that are in the contract. So let's stay on this topic of structuring deals. And what, to the panelists, what's your opinion about or on one-step deals and multi-step deals? What should our members be pushing for?
As much money up front, guaranteed as possible.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I will say one-step deals, have been problematic, certainly, because, one, it almost guarantees that at some point you're going to be rewritten, and what's going to happen, in terms of your creative control over that, as you were talking about, and who's going to rewrite it. But I think one of that's certainly one of the big things too. And I think the other thing I want to mention that's tangentially related is if you sell a spec script, you really need to make sure that you have employment associated with that sale, that you have a rewrite or at least a polish on that. Now, if the script's original and you have separated rights, in fact, they are required to offer you the first rewrite on that.
Right.
They have the ability to say, do you want to waive your right? But they have to offer it to you. But
Don't waive it.
Don't waive it. But, that's really important for pension and health purposes, because if you just sell a spec script and there is no associated employment on it, they do not have to make pension and health contributions on the sale price. But if you add a rewrite, you got a polish to that, they do. And that can be a huge difference in a writer. So, in terms of what you're doing. So a lot of times they'll say, we're just going to buy your script and thank you very much. You really do want to get that employment in there as well.
Right.
Then it's retroactive, right? Like my thing, like if you sell it, the moment that the revision is triggered, then the sale fee counts as well, correct?
Yeah. You'll get it on the purchase price up to the cap from the moment you earn money under employment on that project.
Which that's another thing to talk about when you're looking at deals and steps and stuff. I mean, I don't know. I've certainly played the game of barely making my health insurance. And I think that's something you really can communicate very clearly to your reps and your lawyer and be like, I need $22,000 or $22,162. I mean, you can be so specific and you can make sure that maybe that's, paid in the treatment, and then you can shave some off of the draft. Like you can do that. And I have to say most execs and most business affairs, if they say dude, can you just give us an extra $1,000 so they can make pension and health? Like, honestly, a lot of people are decent. They're like, okay, we get it. We'll do that. And it's something I've done. And I think it's something other people have done. And at the end of the day, I think that a lot of people are willing to help you keep your health insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. And just somebody asked for a clarification on something I said before with the rewrite. If you sell an original screenplay, and I said it's separated rights, but effectively it's the provisions in the guild contract that deal with original screenplays that don't have underlying material. And if you're a professional writer at the time of the sale, that's also something that is defined in the guild agreement, but it's something easy and good to put in your contract. All you have to say is, Allison Schroeder, professional writer. That's it, in the contract. But provided you have that, if it's original, the company has to offer you the first opportunity to do a rewrite on a sale. So that was what I was just trying to say.
Yeah. And I think what happened with me is I sold it and it took a long time for them to trigger the rewrite. And so I had to Cobra my health insurance. But I think I ended up getting paid back a certain amount of the Cobra. But I do know if you have in your contract the amount of money you're owed and you turn in that script and you have an email showing you turned in that script, even if they don't pay you, and your health insurance will be covered. And I'm not sure if you have to Cobra and then you get reimbursed or not. But if they don't pay you, and it's on them and it's their mistake, you don't get penalized by the WGA for your health insurance.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I mean, that sounds reasonable. That's actually the fund the funds plural are a separate legal entity than us.
All right,
But
so
you know,
check.
if you have a contractual right to the money and that's ripe, meaning like they are supposed to pay you and they just haven't done it yet, and it would trigger the contributions, it seems like that seems reasonable. What you just described seems reasonable in that situation.
That's why there's that 3-month delay. You guys know, like when you earn it and then there's like a 3-month delay. I think that's part of why that may be built in there is collection time. But check with the professionals and not me.
Thank you. That's great advice. Now, can you talk a little bit about the difference between a shopping agreement versus optioning a spec versus selling a spec? I know we covered some of the differences about optioning versus selling a spec, but what are shopping agreements?
Yes.
I mean, my worry with shopping agreements is free work. I think Brad has some talking points that he's prepared.
Yeah, but thanks, Josh. But yes, realistically, so shopping agreements are something they're not under, typically they're not under the WGA's jurisdiction, but it's really important to know what a shopping agreement actually is and what's really an option. If the producer says, we're going to enter into the shopping agreement, but I am going to exclusively control your script for a period of time, that's an option. That's not a shopping agreement. You're entitled to guild minimums on that. That is subject to guild jurisdiction. They can't just say, I have exclusive control over this for the next year, and you can't sell it to anybody else without my approval. They're optioning it. They have to become signatory. That's a part of it. The other thing is a lot of times they also can't ask you as part of a shopping agreement to do additional rewrites or additional development work while you're under that agreement. So if they're saying, we want you to keep doing additional work on this while under the shopping agreement, that's an option and they're employing you to do a rewrite. So I think that's important is a lot of times you get a producer who will say, and we see a lot of writers will come to us with, oh, that's a shopping agreement. And I signed this saying that, so-and-so will have exclusive control over this for a certain period of time. And, and then the company is not signatory and then that's problematic. So I think it's really important to know, what that distinction is. And then obviously the purchase is, when you actually do go ahead and transfer the copyright over for the actual sale of the script. But
just
at that point,
before we get, I just want to add one thing on a shopping agreement. My advice to writers in this instance is to use our working rules, specifically working rule 8 that says that you can only work for a signatory company. I would use working rule 8 as a shield in that instance. And I would just tell that non-signatory producer, I can't do it because of the working rules. You've got to option it and you've got to pay me at least guild minimum for every step. And the rules are there to protect writers. So use it for your protection in that instance.
Thank you for that reminder. Turning to the negotiation process, delivery schedules, is that a point for negotiations, and what should writers be asking for?
I mean, when you turn it in, how many weeks you have to write it? Oh, hell yeah. Yeah. One of my biggest pet peeves is when they're like, it's a rewrite. And I'm like, I'm literally starting from scratch. You have not even given me, for me personally, a rewrite is when I am given a final draft and I'm actually working in a final draft someone else has started, right? But if you're literally just opening a new final draft and starting, they'll call it a rewrite. So I asked for 12 weeks for that, 10 weeks for that at least. And I think that's really important. I mean, I think that's also why sometimes I say the timer starts counting when I actually get the check because it buys one more time. But I also think if you are running late, I've never really met an exec. I don't know what they're going to do. You guys tell me what the penalty is. But if I'm I need 2 more weeks, I want to make this really great for you. I've never had an exec be like, I'm suing you. But I do think getting expectations up front, and I also think if you're finishing something else, it's really important to communicate that, where it's on one project, I said, I will be available to start writing in the summer, right? And that was like, my lawyers put that in writing so that I wouldn't get in trouble. So I definitely negotiate all that.
Yeah, and just as you said, Allison, when you're talking about, I need 2 more weeks on this, get that in writing from the studio at the time, and get that in writing when you say, hey, I'm going to make this as, as best as I possibly can. I need a couple more weeks. You need to get that in writing because, it probably doesn't happen all that often, but the company can allege if you don't deliver within the time frame that you've reached the contract. And that can be problematic for the writer on a number of levels. I mean, if, for example, you don't deliver on time, you could potentially be required to pay back the money that the company actually paid you on this. So another thing that this brings to is in your contract, you want to include a clause for a notice of breach and opportunity to cure. So effectively, if the company is trying to say you didn't deliver on time, we think you breached, they have to give you notice, and then they have to give you a couple weeks to fix it. You don't want to have a situation where they say, nope, that's it, we're done, walking away, and oh, by the way, give us our money back.
Yeah, oftentimes that material breach language only benefits the company, and so you'll want to insist upon language that allows you a reasonable period of time to cure. And if in doubt, and they're like not going, like you've asked them to extend the period of time and they haven't responded, or they haven't responded in writing, and that's a requirement under your agreement, I would just deliver. Yep. Even if you've got 20 pages left undone. The MBA says that delivering is not subject to the approval of the company. It's just as long as you've delivered and you've made a good faith effort to do the work within that period of time, that would be better than waiting 2 weeks, having it be better, and then, or having the script more to your liking, and then having the company come back to you and tell you that you've breached.
So I just want to highlight this. Who decides when to deliver the script, when it's ready to be delivered?
The writer.
Allison does.
Sometimes I get mad and I'm like, it's coming, it's being delivered. Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I try to hit it, but I have always found like that first draft and they're like, but we have some producer notes, and you're like, all right, fine. But if push were to come to shove and they were threatening me, I would be like, here it is. This is it with warts and all. This is what you get. I've delivered. Which now I'm slightly stressed out and I really need to finish this screenplay.
And so what advice would you have about naming the executive that receives the script?
Naming the executive?
Yeah, any considerations when you're negotiating? The contract requires that an executive be named, so you know exactly who to deliver it to.
I remember one time one of my contracts had like the president of the studio, and I was like, that's really intense. And so I was like, can you put my executive on there? So definitely, and sometimes it can be more than one name, which I also find helpful.
Yeah, and again, this just goes back to know who that person is that you're supposed to deliver the material to, and who has authorized to actually, commence you on additional writing steps, because that's what's important to know about that, is who that person is. And as Alice said, yeah, if they're talking about the president of the studio, it's probably going to be, better for you to say, maybe we'll take that down a couple steps.
Okay. So what should members know about separated rights? What are separated rights?
That is a loaded question. That is the answer. There's a lot to separated rights, but we can do our best to try to give you a short little primer on how they work, at least in a theatrical context, because they're very different, theatrical and television.
Just a really quick example. How I think of them is there's this thing called copyright, and it's all these rights and you put them together in a bundle, and sometimes people call that a bundle of sticks. Separated rights came out of the NBA. It was won through the strength of collective action, through writers coming together and insisting on certain rights coming back. And so they were separated from that bundle and taken from the company and given back to the writers.
Yeah, that's exactly correct in terms of they are certain pieces of copyright which are peeled off and retained by writers. You know, in order to qualify for that, generally a material needs to be original. So you know, if you have an underlying book or an underlying, you know, comic book or a stage play or something, for the most part, it's not likely to be included. There are exceptions. The other thing is then you have to get a story by, a written by, or a screen story by credit in the context of a theatrical film on it. You know, so one thing important to note there is that separated rights actually attach at the story level. So it's not the writer that writes the screenplay that necessarily gets the separated rights. It is the one who writes the story, because it is about who created the original concept and the original ideas behind it. So that is something that's good to know. And one of the things I did mention too is, you know, if the company gives you an underlying piece of IP or even an underlying character that they owe, if they give you Spider-Man, the chances are it's probably not, you know, something that's going to have separated rights. But if you have something and there is a piece of underlying intellectual property and either you didn't use it because you never got it, as Allison was saying before, or there's a situation where you departed so substantially from it that it doesn't look like the book that they gave you anymore, and you get, for example, a screen story credit. That's important to know, because the guild at that point can actually assert separated rights on your behalf, you know, within 90 days of the finalization of credits, in the event that that happens. So yeah, I mean, there is you know, separated rights themselves, as Josh said, are the actual things that are separated back. Mostly in a theatrical context, we're talking about publication rights and dramatic stage rights, as well as rights to sequel payments and rights to reacquire your script after a period of time. There's certain, you know, tons of rules that apply with all these things. But either way, you know, this is something to note that's important. And also, again, this is something that, you know, it may say in your individual deal that you sold all of these rights over to the studio forever in perpetuity. Guild contract controls. And you may have the ability after a set period of time to write a book based on your original screenplay. And it's your choice and not the company's. And again, contact us, you know, if you have individual questions about that, because they are complicated.
And you can't waive that minimum. The one thing I'll add is sometimes it strikes people as counterintuitive. Like if someone is a well-established author, or even if it was like their first published novel, but if the novel was published or exploited before, you know, they sold the screenplay or were hired to adapt it into a screenplay, even though you wrote the book, the novel, it is not original for purposes of the NBA, because that story, the underlying story, has to be first written or purchased under guild jurisdiction. The good news is, especially if in success, like you would have the ability as an overscale matter to reserve certain rights in your individual deal. And you know, hopefully you have a savvy rep who will then assert that the company is only acquiring certain rights that are necessary to make a motion picture and not all the full bundle of rights, the full bundle of sticks.
And I will say too that we get writers who ask us, who come to us and say, yeah, my rep is telling me that, you know, I have this great story. It's based on a true story, which you can have separated rights in a true story, especially if you did the research and you conducted the interviews and you put the time in. But, you know, somebody may say, my rep has this, you know, I have this great true story. I wrote the screenplay. My rep's telling me we need to, you know, option this book that was from 30 years ago that I didn't use at all, just so we can package it as IP. That may not necessarily be to your advantage, at least in a separated rights context, because if you're including that, you know, you are likely not entitled to separated rights, and you may have just optioned a book that you didn't even use for the purposes of trying to sell it to some studio. So we've definitely gotten those kind of questions too.
Guys, I'm going to bundle these last three questions. They're not related, so if you could Nathan related extra points. What is force majeure?
French.
French. How has streaming changed feature contracts, and what are roundtables, and what should writers know about them?
I mean, we can go rapid fire one each if you want.
Let's do it.
Force majeure, literally it means an act of God, some greater force intervening to prevent something from happening. And companies misuse that to try to bully writers and try to get free option extensions, which is a violation of California state law. They've got to pay you at least guild minimum for every option period, and that option period cannot be longer than 18 months. I just saw that language that violates the minimum in the contract from a major studio, and I'm writing them a letter that they are not going to like to read, even though I really enjoy writing it. It basically has to be impossible or so cost prohibitive that a reasonable-minded person would say, "Oh yeah, you can't do that." And in the context of an option, they can't just shift off onto the writer the costs that are normally associated with the risks associated with a contract. So that's force majeure in a nutshell.
Yeah, and that's such a good point about the fact that now, because of the pandemic, all these companies said, we're just going to extend your option for free. No. And we're citing force majeure. So I guess I'll talk a little bit just quickly about the roundtables. Theatrical roundtables, as I'm sure a lot of people here have participated in, are, a lot of times they occur after a script has already been written and they're looking for some additional work to be done. The really important thing, at least from an MBA standpoint, and I'm sure Allison has some other comments about this, but from an MBA standpoint, technically, a minimum guaranteed employment rate for anybody is a week. So they actually can't employ you for less than a week unless they meet certain criteria. Then they can get you on a daily rate and it has to be 1/5 of the highest weekly minimum of what that theatrical minimum is, but only if they're basically, if the company is giving you an assignment that would normally be completed in less than a week. If you agree that this writing assignment is normally can be completed in less than a week, if it's part of your writing agreement, and also if it only includes really some kind of short descriptive phrase that talks about what it is, something like incidental dialogue. So that's something that they can actually do.
Punch-ups.
Yeah, punch-ups. Yeah, hire you for a day to do for, a punch-up or something like that. But otherwise, the minimum period is a week. The other thing to note is if you ever get, asked in advance to, hey, we have this underlying piece of IP and we want to get together and have everybody discuss what kind of story we're going to do here, that could be a big issue, because you may end up in a situation where who gets the credit, and they would have to, bring a waiver to us to say, we had 6 writers in the room. This is a 6 writing team, and who ends up with credit on this. So if you find yourself in that kind of a situation, it's best to, call us and find out, if they've gone through that process, because a lot of times, you may find yourself left behind in, that credit determination process.
If there's no script in existence and it's 3 or more writers fully collaborating to come up with story ideas or to break story for a feature-length film, then that requires a waiver, and they've got to pay you a percentage over the minimum for that work.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever done one of those, but those are the ones you have to really watch out for, where you're like, what if you come up with a movie and then you're not hired to write it and you don't get credit for it? That's like the worst. I've done a lot of daily roundtables where it is sort of, normally there's a writer hired and they might like send a document where they're like, should I do this or should I do this? And you sort of brainstorm both ways. And then I've also it's punch up on a script or an act that's not working. And in those situations, it is my understanding, everyone gets paid exactly the same. And so your lawyer should make sure you're getting what everybody else is. And in general, like when you're given an offer, your lawyer should be able to tell you if you're getting parity to other writers at the same level. And if your lawyer is not able to tell you that, you should switch lawyers. I always ask, I'm like, is this what someone else with my credits is making? And a lot of times he's like, nope. And I'm like, then go back. So make sure you have, just make sure you have someone that knows that stuff.
Look at our Deal Hub too.
And yeah, and I think the last thing you were asking about is how is new media changing everything? And it's really, it is. That's a very loaded topic as well. And it's interesting. I think the biggest thing to note is that you should know when you're going in what the project is. They should be able to tell you, we think this is going to be are you writing this as a television movie made for streaming? Are you writing this as a theatrical? And a lot of times, if they don't know, you can negotiate as a theatrical. Negotiate for that, credit bonus for 1% of the budget. What we don't want and what we are, is problematic is when companies try to pick and choose. They try to take the best of both worlds. We'll take this from, what your typical long form television contract looks like, and we'll take this from what your theatrical contract looks like, and we're just throw it all in there in the hopes that, in the end, we'll just pick and choose which one we want. And that really is where it becomes problematic.
They have an implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, and they should make accurate representations under that, consistent with that obligation, that covenant, to tell you what the intended medium is.
All right, guys, thank you for that discussion. We're going to turn to question and answers, and please raise your hand and prepare to come on camera and turn your mic on. Simon Lewis, you'll be our first person to ask a question, followed by Richard, and then Deborah Mazza. So Simon, please ask your question.
Oh, I don't know if this is working or you can hear me or if I'm on camera. Is it working okay?
We got you.
Great.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Well, my interest actually is in new media, and I have my own loan out, and I want to do a low budget new media production. I've had some conversations with the funds. I'm an attorney, I do a little bit of everything. I was a manager and so on. And my understanding is, A, that it's complicated. So I realized that maybe there's a web or WGA resource. I'm a member of 20 years standing, etc. But my question is, I'm sort of understanding that if I do it as a web series, the intention is to do a low budget comedy, a bit like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, a web series, very, very low budget, and just to see if we can get it sold onto Amazon or Hulu. My understanding is that it only becomes WGA if a streamer actually picks it up. So I'm trying to find my way honestly to find a way to do this as a WGA project, actually. I'm not trying to duck any hurdles. I would like to pay my co-writer WGA as well. But how does it work? And in other words, is that really what it comes to? And how do I bridge it across? And how do I pay myself as a writer and my co-writer under WGA if I don't yet know if it'll even sell to Hulu or Amazon and so on, or Netflix?
I think the issue is going to be with, you have to have bona fide third-party funding in order for the funds to accept the contributions. Because once it's developed, once you begin, I realize not everyone writes with a pen and paper anymore, but once the keystrokes start getting punched in, if the company that is employing you to do that is signatory, then it's WGA covered. But I think the hurdle that you're running into is if you're self-financing, there are some tax rules that require that that funding be from a bona fide third party in order for the fund to accept those contributions.
Right.
That's really a question for the fund.
Oh, okay, but that's exactly helpful, I hope, to other people. And so the question I have is there a proper way of self-funding the making of essentially the pilot before there's a third-party funding, and then transitioning it across if Amazon or Netflix say, yes, we like the pilot and we are going to pick this up? Then when the third-party funding becomes real after the pilot has been shot.
Yeah, and that's going to turn on what the plan document says, and as well as what the applicable tax rules allow. It's beyond the scope of what we can. It's broad. We can't answer. I can't answer that question.
I mean,
Okay. That's a good answer, actually. That is actually helpful to know. Thank you.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Brad?
I was just going to say, what I will say is, you talked about something not being a WGA covered series. If you're employing any writer under a company that's signatory to the WGA agreement, it's a WGA covered series. So I don't know if your company is actually signatory at this point, or if that's intention, but that's, I know you said you have a loan out. I don't know if it is, but that's certainly something that would make a difference. It doesn't have to be covered by Netflix or Amazon or Hulu or somebody. It's anybody who hires a writer that's signatory to our agreement.
Okay, and to answer your question, I'm signatory, my loan out signatory under the informational program contract, but I haven't yet done the paperwork for new media.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. And the funds should have an answer to that question. At what point are they satisfied with the arm's length nature of the funding, and what work would they allow that third party financing to be count towards in regards to when they will and will not accept contributions?
Thank you. I have a long track record for doing informational programs under guild jurisdiction. So this is really helpful. Thank you for everybody. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Simon. Richard, you're up. If someone's having trouble raising their hand, you could text me through the chat that you'd like to be called on to speak. Richard, all yours.
Hi, yes. First of all, thank you guys. The Guild is amazing. You guys have always stood in my corner. I've sued some big names and won thanks to you guys. So thank you very much. Recently, a big name Emmy-winning actor and his manager wanted to get a shopping agreement for my original screenplay. Sent it over to Liz over at Contracts. She was amazing. She goes, this is happening all the time. This is an option. It is not a shopping agreement. She told me exactly what to do. Her and my lawyers got together, they confabbed, and she said, most importantly, they're shopping it as is. As I just wanted to share it with you fellow WGA writers that shopping agreements, as you guys said, are not covered under the Guild. She turned me on to this site called Done Deal, and that's what I send over to my lawyer. They had a sample of a shopping agreement, basically as is. They cannot ask for any changes. They cannot add any other writers or anything. They still want it for 12 months. We tried 6 months, all that kind of stuff. But you guys are amazing. I just wanted to tell you guys that Liz is incredible. And also, as all you guys are at the WGA, but most importantly, that this is a proliferation of these things called shopping agreements, trying to get under the fence. And basically she said, working rule number 8, this is a violation. You cannot sign this. Now realizing all these big producers, big name folks are saying, oh, this is a shopping agreement. And they all are basically options, free options, violating rule number 8. So I wanted to share that with you guys, donedeal.com, and just wanted to share a positive story that as usual, you guys, Labor Day, Go Union, are helping us. So thank you.
That's awesome. I read that shopping agreement.
Yes.
Both versions.
Yeah. And Liz
Great
has
work.
done a great job. And my lawyer sent it over to Liz, and Liz has said, make these changes. And so now my lawyer is doing that. And of course, what did the the actors manager say? The WGA is mentioned so many times in this agreement. Could we lighten up on that? So it'll get done. It'll get done.
Awesome.
And just as long as, most importantly, as is, folks, as is on that shopping agreement, that means they cannot replace you. Anyways, and thank you, Josh. Hopefully, you know, you didn't throw up in your mouth by what the actor's manager had said.
I'm not sure. Nothing surprises me in Hollywood anymore.
Of course. Anyways, this was a thank you and a warning to you guys. Thank you.
We appreciate it, Richard. Deborah Maza, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
I'm trying. It said the host wouldn't let me. All right. Thank you so much, guys, for doing this. Thank you, Allison, for taking time to share your personal experience, and congratulations from years back on your Veritas Award. I just wanted to ask a question about, since we're in an evolving industry and new forms of showing films take on whole different definitions. So I have so many questions. I don't want to take everyone's time. So I think I'm going to have to call Brad or Joshua tomorrow or next week. I have a movie that was made literally like decades ago, that now that CBS is also Paramount, is also this, is also that, now becomes like a streaming thing that was originally a network MOW. And so contracts were negotiated before you were able to negotiate for platforms that didn't exist. So I have a multi-part question. They can be quick answers, but first, how far back do you go on looking at contracts and seeing whether or not there's anything that can be done to help writers now? The fact of a cap has always upset me, in that they keep making money for stuff. Why do we stop getting paid for it? And with that in mind, I'd also like to differentiate between the term cap and ceiling, which is something your pension and health tells you that, you know, Warner Brothers doesn't have to pay me anymore because it's reached the ceiling kind of thing. So if you can uncouple those or tell us if those are interchangeable. And then I just have one quick follow-up.
So, I mean, it just depends. It's one of those things. It's not like there's a simple answer. There's a statute of limitations under the NBA if it's a feature film, you know, versus a you know, television program. We can go back 4 years, but not greater than 2 years for TV and 18 months for features from when the Guild first had knowledge.
But I think what Deborah is asking, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're asking, you wrote something years ago and they're now they're now using it to make something new.
Well,
so
yeah.
Well,
I mean, they're not making a new program. They're taking that MOW and putting it on different service that they sell memberships for.
So at that point, yeah, that would be a residuals question for the reuse of what you have from that. And there are different percentages that are owed for that. And I understand that one of the big issues that we are facing as a guild is companies licensing things to themselves when writers are supposed to get a percentage of license fees. So that's certainly something, but yeah, I mean, certainly you can reach out to us, you can reach out to the Guild's residuals department to find out, you know, what they should be paying on that, because there is an entire, you know, side letter on how that works.
Yeah, especially with new companies that didn't exist that are now part of that overall umbrella of parent companies. So we didn't have the option to negotiate for those. But in terms of separation rights, at the time back, what year did the Guild pull those back? Because
almost from the very beginning.
Yeah,
There's been some form of separated rights for a very long time.
Okay, so at this particular major studio in the contract, it was like they were like, no, we always retain separated rights. We never give those over. And my lawyer was like, well, they never give them over. And so the question is, can we then call the Guild and say, do you have examples of when Warner Brothers gave over separation rights? Because they're telling us that, or do you, I mean, how does a writer say, their business affairs people are saying, take it or leave it? What do I have to protect me?
you can't waive a minimum term. And if what you wrote was wholly original and not based on previously published or exploited material,
Yes.
then you would qualify for separated rights as long as it was first written or sold under the jurisdiction of the NBA. And in the context of an MOW, those sequel rights in certain instances revert. And so, you know, we could look at your contract and we can tell you what we think.
Okay.
I think you might be talking about their ability to buy what are reserved rights, which are certain parts separate rights. And I will say that you're under television only, which is very different than how it works in a theatrical context. You know, I will say that years and years ago, the companies were not buying out ever reserved rights for people. They have to pay an upset price and they have to negotiate with you for a different, you know, a separate agreement for separate consideration in order to buy those rights. And you can negotiate for that. And you can put things in there like, you want the publication rights, fine, but I get, you know, 6% of all your net proceeds or gross proceeds, you know, something like that. I mean, you could include all of those things in those agreements. Unfortunately, the companies have taken this as, and this is again, this is with television, as a, you know, you're getting $100, take it or leave it. It's one of my least favorite parts of the MBA, and I would love to get more education out there on that one.
I would love for you guys to do that. And just the last point is, and this was an experience with the contracts department, on one of those deals, they did not, because this is in our contract, this is a given Writers Guild thing that we've all fought for. They have to give you a screener, the same way they give the director, et cetera, so that you can then review it before they release it or whatever. And I hadn't gotten my screener. And so I called the Writers Guild Contracts Department and to verify, wasn't I supposed to get this copy too? And I had there was a pretty contentious director on this thing, who really felt that the writer shouldn't have a vision. It's really just their vision and you're done and go, you know, and I was like, I need to see this. I just told the contracts rep at that time, I just want to know my rights so I can go back to them with the rights. Don't get involved. But she went ahead and called and spoke to the executive director. Shortly after that phone call, I just got a screaming call from him saying, "You've embarrassed me with the Writers Guild. You should," blah, blah, blah. You know, but they sent the screener, and I caught all these plot holes that could be fixed in ADR because someone didn't want to memorize lines. And
Awesome.
You know, bottom line is you can't say someone's wanted for murder. You have to say she's wanted for questioning. Otherwise, every scene with her, you have to arrest her. So it was that sort of thing. But my question at the end now is, if that should happen again, there's a big difference between giving to reporting something to the guild and saying, please handle this to me, or giving consent for them to go forward, or at very least giving me the knowledge that they're going to call up these people, because you don't want to be in a position where someone's calling you and screaming at you. So what's the policy now?
Yeah, we don't like it when writers get screamed at. You know, that sounds like the kind of behavior that's, one, unacceptable, and that two, they can't discriminate against you for enforcing your rights under the collective bargaining agreement. And one of those rights is what you just described, which is viewing the cut. You have a right, creative right, to view the cut. And I always try to coordinate with the writer and have the folks that I supervise coordinate with the writer before we start throwing fireballs at the company.
So the writer can say, give me a chance to try to handle this on my own, and then I'll let you know if I need help. Okay, excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much. Glad that's the way that is. I appreciate it.
We have Kathy here from Creative Rights. Do you want to speak to this issue, this question, Kathy? All right.
Hi, can you,
yeah.
Albert, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on.
So Deborah, what I typically will do is ask, I will provide the provision to you, the writer, to give to your rep to handle, to reach out first. It's only after that sort of doesn't get anywhere that I will step in, or, somebody from contracts or whatever. But typically I will handle it and step in with the labor relations person at the studio, not directly the producer or the executive. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. I'm glad that's the way it is, because writers don't want to be blindsided by people. Executives have egos and they think we went behind their back and reported them. And it's true, we did, because they're in violation, but we still got to be protected. So thank you. That's great.
Sure.
Thing about a lot of people don't, I don't know. I got like a survey when my first movie was released of like, did they do the following things? And I was like, I did not know they were supposed to, but you are allowed to see a cut of the film. And I really recommend anyone that's going into an arbitration for a film, see it, because you need to make sure that the final shooting script that they're submitting for the arbitration is what the movie ended up being. There's some dicey stuff that can go there, and I'll just leave it at that. So definitely exercise that right whenever you can. The other thing is, if it's a big movie, right, and this is one of those like game changers, one of the best things that you can do is hire a publicist. And what that publicist can do is it can make sure you're getting to the premiere, and it can make sure you're getting all of these benefits and these things that aren't necessarily in your contract, but that's what publicists do. They advocate for you and they get these things for you. So in terms of advocacy, it's like use your reps, use your manager, you can use a publicist and get these things that you're entitled to when a feature is released.
Thanks, Deborah. Len, we're gonna turn to you and ask you to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for this presentation. I have a dim memory that during the agent action, there was talk of a group of lawyers who could help writers on contracts. I don't know if that is still in place. And in fact, are you guys that group, or are there legions of other attorneys who are willing to do this kind of work should you want another opinion in addition to, say, your agents on a contract?
You're looking at them.
There are not legions of others. So it was, largely us, and also a lot of our legal folks as well. But, because of, obviously, it was something we were doing during the agency action, because we understand that we, obviously writers were terminating their relationships with agents. So we wanted to provide that outlet. It is not something that we're not involved anymore in the actual negotiating of the deals directly. But what I will say, Len, is you're welcome to send over something to us that we can take a look at. We're not gonna, carve it all up and send it back to the company and say, here's all the changes to it. But we certainly will review it, and we'll review it for MBA minimums, and we can definitely give you advice, as we were talking about here, in terms of, additional things that might be good to add, would be helpful for you, if, to the extent that you can do so.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Len. Lucas O'Connor.
There we go. Hey, thank you all so much for all of the help and all the information. I saw a question in the chat that also applies to me, so I figured I would just say it out loud, which is a late pay question. Your short form is done, your deal is closed, but the person asking the question asked, if your long form is done, does that hold up payment? For me, it was that I was told I wasn't owed an option fee several months in because the rights agreement was still like being worked out with my lawyers. Is that actually true, or was I owed money from the date of close?
We would investigate, and we're pretty aggressive. The one that I told you about last week, where on a Thursday, the rep told the company that the guild was going to enforce, and then on a Friday they were told that they were going to cut a check. That involved the rights issue. And the reason why for the holdup was the underlying rights. And if the company has unclean hands, if they're basically acting in, a self-serving way that's harming you, that sounds like pretty good facts. And we could go after interest in that instance.
And one of the things I will say too, and I don't know if this is as standard in theatrical as in television, but companies try to say, oh, we're withholding 10% of the payment contingent on the long form. Definitely cannot be below minimum. And also, did you even agree to that as part of the deal points? If you have a deal point that says they're going to pay you, $150,000 for this first draft, they can't just say, oh, and by the way, we're going to withhold 10% of this contingent on the long form. So we see that kind of stuff as well. And, to the extent that the company is trying to do something like that and trying to pay you less than what they contractually agreed to pay you, again, fact specific, but we are pretty aggressive when it comes to those kind of things and enforcing late pay.
We look at every fact.
I've definitely been commencement with a short form without a long form. Like that's sort of my lawyer's whole thing is like, yeah, let's get you some money.
Yeah, and as we said, you can start with a short form because that deal's in place, and there's precedent in guild arbitration that says that this is the operative deal that you're writing under at the time until a new one gets put in place. So and it's why you obviously want to include all the material terms in the deal points, but that doesn't always happen. But you certainly can write, and as Allison said, they should be paying you commencement as soon as you start doing that.
I agree.
Lucas. Lori, I know you had trouble raising your hand, so I want to call on you now. Lori Roseanne Gambino's up next.
I won't unmute for you. All right, I'll read your lips. Go, Lori.
This is fun. What we'll do is we'll go to Stacy and then Lori.
Oh, here I am.
There we
It
go.
didn't work. It didn't work. Is it working now? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Allison. Allison's my WGA mentor, and she's awesome. So thank you again, Allison. So here's my question. My first one is, I'm a feature writer. I'm getting submitted from producers a lot of 2- and 3-pagers that are from directors, and there's kind of a seed of an idea there and some like character sparkle. And then I'm being really lowballed in offers to write these as like non-original, stories when I'm really breaking the entire story. So I want to know how to protect myself if 2 to 3 pages are considered IP, like what is the legalese for that? And then my other question is, because I'm relatively new, is there's a big gap between, the minimums and this new Deal Hub mediums. So I want to know how I can best use that to my advantage as well.
Great. I mean, the simple answer is whether or not it's assigned material, we would look to see whether or not they are assigning a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And conceptually, when you're reading it, does it seem like a story with a beginning, middle, and end? And if it doesn't, then it's not assigned material.
Yeah. If they're giving you something, and this is something that, a lot of times gets into question of whether or not it can be considered part of the, material used in the credits arbitrations and things like that, as well as, whether or not does it constitute an actual story and is it in there? And I will say that there are current issues that we're dealing with about things that were claimed to have been assigned, but really didn't have a story. I mean, just something that says, here's the name. I mean, this is, dystopian, dystopian thriller, go, like, or whatever it might be, like, that's not a story. And if they're trying to say that, a lot of it is because 1, they're trying to get it non-original, and 2, they're trying to potentially hurt, separated rights in the event that you, do create an original story. And that also would give you, again, screenplay credit or whatever it may be. So, or instead of written by credit. So all of these things affect and will be on the back, will affect you on the back end. So, I mean, I think that's something we look at. And I think I would tell the producer producers at the time, either this is going to be original or you need to give me something much more fleshed out that actually includes, principal characters and a beginning, middle, something that looks like a treatment as opposed to, literally just a one pager or a two pager.
Yeah,
The
I was
other,
talking about the upfront because it's really not indicative of the work that's required. So
Mhm.
that's what I mean. So that's really just having to go back and having those conversations as you suggest. So thank you.
yeah, the term story and treatment are used interchangeably in places in the MBA. And if it doesn't look like a treatment, if it doesn't look like something that's suitable for a screenplay, then it's not. And we could always arbitrate it. That provision in the MBA says that if the company is assigned material that they assert that it's a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, we could always submit it to arbitration. Could it be a story within 3 pages? Maybe. You're the expert, so I'm just an attorney. I'm not I tell stories, but not, for the big bucks, just to my kids and make their eyes glaze over about when I was young and didn't have wrinkles. Yeah, I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
And I think the other thing you asked about was the Deal Hub.
Yeah.
There's definitely a difference between that and the Deal Hub. And the Deal Hub was born out of really a lot of the data that the Writers Guild is getting since the agency action. We're getting a lot more information we never got before. Again, it's why it's important for everybody to submit contracts. I spend a lot of time trying to get companies to submit contracts, but it's like pulling teeth. But I will say that we get a lot of our research folks take a lot of time and effort to put in. We have people enter in all of the data from people's contracts to come up with that. And I understand that, in some sense, making it more nuanced is a good thing to be able to help people. What kind of a credit? What are you talking about? I think, you try to use that in a sense of, as much as you can to say, this is what I know the medium to be, but you can always call us and you could always email us too, especially if you're negotiating with somebody specific. I mean, it's something where we may be able to say, and obviously we're not giving names or anything, but we would be able to tell you, we think, of the last couple deals that we've seen with this particular studio, here's what people may be getting for that. Now, we don't know as much as, everything, but the more of the Writers Deal Hub is really just designed to be as much information we could put out there, the better writers are going to be, because pushing up somebody's, quote pushes up everybody's quote. So that's kind of the intention behind it. And, again, that's a relatively new thing that we're doing because of all the additional information that we're getting. So I hope it's useful, but obviously we're going to be further refining that as time goes on.
I remembered my other thought.
Really useful
go ahead.
for our reps, to really have that information, our attorneys and our reps to have that. So, since
And they should be able to see it. I was just going to say, most of the time when I see a 2 or 3 page document like the one you described, it is not a story, is the one thing I was going to tell you. That was like the most important point, that long rambly thing. And then the other is, we'll give you advice, based on what we see. We see, hundreds of these agreements, and sometimes maybe it isn't the type of advice that would apply to everybody, but it might apply to your situation. And then the last point is, the more transparent we make it, the less power the companies have and the more power writers have. And that's really the heart and soul of why we're doing the Deal Hub.
Great. Thank you very much. Great information. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Stacy?
All right, thank you. I'd like to know, is there anything that you can put in your contract up front? It's original content, original story, story by me, screenplay by me, that at the end of the process, everybody and their dog doesn't jump on and go, oh, I get a story by credit because I, named a character, or the director says, well, I added this one scene, and then all of a sudden it gets edited out. but yet they added the C. Is there anything that you can put in your contract up front that will help alleviate that credit arbitration at the end if it gets crazy and out of hand?
Well, the guild
And
does.
you-
Sorry. Go ahead. I mean, the
Oh,
guild
go
does
ahead.
not do what participating writer is. Not anybody can just be a participating writer. They have to have a guild contract or hired to do a step. Even if you're in a round table, because you don't deliver material in a round table, you are not actually eligible for credit. So even if you're listed in an arbitration, you can't vie for credit for it. So unless
Well-
you had a guild contract, then
Well, they can request story by credit, but unless their hands touch the keyboard and actually change the script. But if they make a suggestion in development and you use it, then they go, oh, well, I should get credit. I should get a story by credit for that because that was my idea.
They have to write under our jurisdiction. They'd have to provide, as Allison said, a contract showing that they either sold on spec a treatment under our jurisdiction, or they were employed to write a treatment. And companies try to, bully writers into that all the time, but that gets weeded out in our credits determination process. The other thing is just a simple reference that, if you sold a script on spec, the title, comma, an original screenplay, that's enough. Any reference to original is all you need.
Okay. All right, great. And nobody can, like if they try to get you to sign something or slip something in a pre-deal, a memo deal that goes against guild MBA, the basic agreement, the guild takes precedent, right? I mean, they can't overwrite what the guild dictates. Is this true?
I'm full of corny sayings. That's Article 9, which in German means no. And if there's a below minimum term in your agreement, then 9 means no, and you can't waive it. The problem is sometimes they'll have you, they'll try to have you waive something that isn't necessarily expressly a minimum term. And that's where you need to have your rep show backbone and push back hard.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Stacy. Mishna?
Hey guys, nice to put some faces to some names. I am curious about underlying material. Sorry. So a lot of stuff. I've heard anecdotally lately a lot of stories about production and companies not securing underlying rights, and I'm also, I'm out on a lot of things with underlying rights, and I'm finding myself having to pitch to secure the rights as well. And I'm just kind of curious about assignments based on IP and what you should be looking for. Sort of, I guess this is more of a front end question, like going into pitching on IP, but also on the back end, when you get that contract and the IP is not listed in the contract, what that means, sort of generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot, but I guess I've started to talk, so I'll keep talking. So the short answer is you'll want to make sure that they're really clear up front whether or not they have the rights, before you do any work. Oftentimes the company will put that as a condition precedent. I know most people say precedent, but I want to sound extra sophisticated. So condition precedent. If you're commenced and they say, oh, we're going to have you, start writing, and you've started to write, and then they come back to you and say, oh, no, we can't pay you. We don't have the underlying rights. They've waived it. We're going to go after them for that step, and anything that's guaranteed that's triggered by you being commenced on that step.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is we've had situations where they say, oh yeah, well, we never were able to secure the underlying rights, so we're sorry that you wrote a draft on this, but you know, we're like, no, you waive that when you commenced her, and that's part of it, that they still owe you that money. And then I think the other thing you were asking is if it's not listed in your individual agreement, I mean, that's on them. And also, did you get it? I mean, that's something that Allison's saying too, is a lot of times they put something in there. Is it listed in there? Did you ever receive it? And if you're talking about, you know, in a theatrical context, it's a possibility that if you never got it, even if it is based on some underlying IP, that it could still be deemed original because you never actually had that underlying material with it.
I've definitely written a movie based on a book that was not written yet. I'm just going to take a moment of silence for that pain.
So did you have a
We all
follow-up?
will.
Yeah.
I don't know how to make you go on mute.
Hello, I'm unmuted now. But what if they pay you and they never actually get the rights?
At least you got paid. So yay for that.
But-
Heartbreak because you wanted to make the film.
Yeah, are you talking about in terms of ownership or what?
I'm just in terms of like how to prevent this from happening, one, and two, like what is the studio's sort of accountability on asking writers to do work on material that they don't own yet, but they have every intention of owning?
I mean, this is, my lawyer was saying this happens and this is your reps. Like your reps should not even be sending you in for a job unless the underlying rights have been secured. And it's, I don't think that agents always ask the right questions. And so I think it sucks. So the best thing I can say is learn from it and then make sure next time it happens. But if they paid you, that's better than nothing, I guess.
Yeah.
Better than nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see the heartbreak of where it was listed as a condition precedent, and you know, the writer was never commenced, and then the person's like totally bummed because they really needed that gig.
Right. Okay.
Commissioner.
Okay.
I don't see any hands raised, so I'm gonna take this chance to say thank you to everybody. And I know if we were in a room, there'd be a lot of applause. Tom O'Connor says, thank you, very informative, good questions. So the thank yous are coming in. And I'd like to leave the last word with our panelists. If there's any closing remarks you'd want to share with the membership.
I mean,
I would really like to say something inspirational.
I know you can do it.
Oh, I know what I was supposed to say. Oh, crap. Sorry.
It's you.
Time.
Delicate flower. The biggest power that you have as a writer is walking away from a bad deal. And it is the scariest thing to do. And a lot of writers don't do it because it's scary and maybe financially you can't, right? But I will tell you that when I have been lowballed, the only way that I have gotten a better deal is I've walked away, and I've walked away 3 times, and every single time they come back to me. Again, right now my career is lovely and I'm, in a certain position, but I will say like, that is your power, and another thing you can say is like, you can push back on what you want and what your number is and what you're willing to do it for. And like, you need to tell your reps going into it. You need to be like, this is what I want. This is how many steps I want. These are the conditions I want. And they need to fight for that. You know what I mean? And if you have one of them playing bad cop, you definitely need to designate one of them playing good cop, so that while the bad cop is like hammering business fairs so they're crying, the good cop is like, God, we love working with you, and she's so excited to do this. Come on, like, so, but these are things I learned the hard way. Like, I'd have someone yell and be like, oh, your person's playing too hardball, so make sure someone might, but the biggest power you have is to walk away, and it actually happens so rarely that it kind of startles them sometimes, and they will come back. Not all the time. Not all the time. There are other times where they're like, see ya. But if you really think it's a bad deal, that is the power you have. Okay, I'm done.
That's a perfect sign off. Thank you, guys. Take care, stay safe and healthy.
Thanks, everyone.